You can take a guy from the country, but you can't take the country out of the guy. So thank you for the help, Joe. We're doing this together. I am here to confess that wearing a mask is a huge struggle for me, and I have not been here because of that. And what I notice, it happened again today, is it's more than just uncomfortable. I have a little bit of claustrophobia, and so I have an emotional reaction, and it distracts me from the worship. And to focus on the Lord's Supper, Dave did an excellent job, is a real struggle for me because I'm breathing, and I'm a heavy breather. When I went scuba diving with Matt and Mark, our two sons, I was always the first one up because I just suck all that air up, and I say, you guys are together, you have to come up together. I'll see you later, bye. So I'm just a heavy breather. And it's a confession. It's not an excuse necessarily, just a statement. And so wearing the mask and singing is just a real trial for me, but I'm trying today to I love being with you all. Some of you had said you'd missed me, and I've missed you all. And I love the fact that we can watch online, but I don't love the fact that we can watch online in another way. For those of you who are watching and have the same concerns or similar or different concerns and are watching, I sympathize. So I'm asking for you to be patient with me and those like me who just want to be here and just really struggle with wearing a mask for 3 hours. And please, forgive us, don't judge us, understand that we would love to be here. And we miss you all and we love you all. And I'm glad I can be here today. Before we begin with Paul before Galio, we're going to ask Terry to express thanks for our class and to be with us.
God and Father in heaven, we come before you. It's so thankful to you for this time that we can set aside to study from your word. Help us as we study these scriptures, Father, this morning. Help us to see the faith that Paul, Priscilla, and Aquila had. Help us to imitate that faith, Father, in our own lives. Help us to grow our faith more towards you, and help us to, as we go through this class, help us to see the grace that you've given everyone, Father, from the beginning to now, and help us to accept that grace, Father. And through Jesus we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Excellent prayer. So we're going to do a quick review of where Joe ended. I just want to go over a quick timeline. Anybody that's had one of my classes probably was afflicted with my constant presentation of timelines. And I finally figured out why, because it's a fact that I can present and I can hide from the meaning of the scripture, and I can just talk about timelines, and I don't have to understand and tell you how much I don't know about the scripture. So I think that's a confession as well. So if we date the beginning of the church, I grew up, and if you all grew up in the church, with AD 33, and it's not actually right because of some dating problems, and most people go today with 29 or 30, and if you disagree with any of these dates, it would just be better if you came to me after. I'd love to talk about it with you, but if you could, because this is not the main thrust of the lesson. So if we go with 30, because it's easier to remember, persecution begins right away. Stephen was stoned at about 6 months' time, give or take. These are all approximate. So within 6 months, the persecution is just full-blown, and Paul gets involved in the persecution. The thinking is that Paul was triggered when he saw what was going on in the stoning of Stephen. He thought, yeah, this is a rabble-rousing group. We've got to stop this. This is taking them away from Jewish religion. And so Paul is converted, though, in about 31 AD, give or take. This is approximate. So not too long after Stephen, 6 months, a year, something like that. Cornelius is converted in about 38. Some daters feel pretty good about that date. So that's 8 years after the church has begun. Now they're reaching out to Gentiles. Herod Agrippa had been persecuting the church. There was a famine, but he dies in 44, so the persecution kind of lets off a little bit. And then Paul begins on his journey shortly after that in about 44, 45 AD. I'm going with 45, lasting about 3 years to 48. Again, it's approximate. And then there's the conference in Jerusalem in 49, approximately. That's when Claudius expels the Jews from Rome, which brings us to Priscilla and Aquila. And then he begins a second journey in about 50. And then that's where we begin today, that Paul is in Corinth in about 50 AD, which is about 20 years after the beginning of the church. So you can see all of the changes through that have taken place in those 20 years from the beginning of the church to the preaching to Gentiles and to Paul being converted from a persecutor to a defender of the faith. And so let me get my notes. So let's do a quick review. I already mentioned Priscilla and Aquila. They're expelled from Rome. They come to Corinth. They're tent makers like Paul. Paul joins them. And then the third person to arrive in Corinth is Galio in about 50 AD. He's only going to be there for a short time. It's evident in the things that happen. Paul's going to the synagogue every Sabbath to reason with them, and he's testifying to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ. I love that. Jesus is that's what we're told. That's what Luke tells us. He's there to say, Jesus is the Christ. I just love that simplicity of what Paul was doing. But the Jews opposed and reviled Paul. If you recall in the study, Paul shakes off his garments, a little like, shaking the dust off your feet or whatever. And he said, the blood be on your own heads. He tried. They rejected. He was going to go to people who were going to listen. So he moves next door to the house of Titius Justus, who apparently is a Christian. Crispus is converted, and he's a ruler of the synagogue. So Paul he did the right thing. He left the synagogue to those who refused him and reviled him. And it says many Corinthians were baptized. And if you remember the wonderful vision, what was the vision, you remember? What did the Lord say in the vision? Be not afraid. Be not afraid. I love that. So the Jews decide, after Galio get there, personally I think that was the trigger. He arrives on the scene, and shortly after they said, look, we got a new proconsul. He doesn't know Paul, so this is our chance. So they make a united attack on Paul. They drag him to the tribunal, my terms. It says they forced him. And what was his charge? His charge was persuading men to worship God contrary to the law. So my first question, I think, on the sheet is why charge Paul before the Roman proconsul and not the local magistrate? Why charge Paul before the Roman proconsul and not, and this is in verse 12. Why did they choose that instead of the local magistrate? If you remember in Thessalonica, it was the local magistrate. So why do you think they did that? Any idea? It's okay if you don't know. Just what? That's true. Never thought about that, Mike. That is a really good point, though. Okay, I'll accept that. I think there's more in addition to, not instead of. Good point. Thank you, Mike. Boy, you're Johnny on the spot. Yes? Yeah.
It's kind of like you alluded to it, and I sort of explained that he was new and maybe they were trying to leverage that to their advantage.
Yes, I think so. Leverage it. And why did they want to leverage it? Yes.
Maybe lack of knowledge of Paul, lack of knowledge of Judaism. I'm not.
Yes. Yes. Thank you, Joe. I agree. So one of my answers is any decision by a local magistrate, like in Thessalonica, only has control where? In the local area. So they're thinking, well, this is just a local guy. So they've decided a verdict of a Roman governor would also be followed by other Roman governors in other provinces. So they think, wow, if we go to this new proconsul, Galio, he seems like a sharp guy. He's new on the scene. He has the ear of the whatever they're called, emperor at that time. And so they decide, the third answer I have is, these Jews want to stop Paul completely, not just in Corinth. I think it's likely they heard about him from Thessalonica and from the other events. People were following him. So that's my answer. I can't prove that in any way, shape, or form, but that's my answer. So I think it's important to notice that they dragged him before the proconsul and that they were there to try and stop Paul. So my next question is, in verse 13, what law are the Jews referring to? They said contrary to what law? Is this Jewish law or Roman law? Joe alluded to it a little Wednesday night. I just want to kind of elaborate on it. What law? Jewish or Roman?
Jewish.
Jewish, okay. Why do you say that?
Because that's what they were concerned with.
Okay.
That was a deficit in Teapot.
Okay. I can't disagree with that. Anybody else have a different opinion? Yes?
I think it was Roman because, number one, he was preaching another king other than what the Roman government had.
Yes.
And so for them to take him to the proconsul, that's how I feel.
Interesting. Well, my answer was both. And Joe talked about it being ambiguous, and I think that's what they were trying to do, was be ambiguous. I think it was the shotgun, the scatter approach. Let's try everything to stop Paul, and let's see what will work. We'll give him options. We'll give Galio options. So Paul's teaching that the Messiah has come and a new law. Jack was right. So in that sense, he was teaching a new law compared to what they were used to. It was the fulfillment of the old law, but they didn't see it that way. They disagreed. And why Roman law? Because the principle of collegium licitum, or that's a word for lawful assembly. Actually, the collegium is assembly and licitum is lawful, but we would say it the other way. But lawful assembly, and so this is not on your questions, but what is collegium licitum? And the answer is that it's a status that was conferred on the Jews by the Romans. It wasn't a status that said they're as good as anybody else. It was lower than that. The Romans were strong anti-Semites. They didn't like the Jews, but they didn't want to spend time having riots and wars and all of that. So they gave them this status of let them worship. So all Jews were permitted to worship using what the Romans called ancient rituals. So they said, look, let them worship. If they're not harming anybody, if they're not out causing trouble in the streets, and when they did, the Romans did get involved, as it happened in Rome in 44. They expelled the Jews. They said, look, you're causing trouble. You can worship, but worship somewhere else, please. So the Jews were given what they called lawful protection to worship, but not to cause trouble. So with that said, if Paul is teaching a new religion, he wouldn't be covered by this lawful protection. And I think that's what they were going for. They were trying to say, look, he's not one of us. But why didn't that work? Why didn't that work with Galio? Galio saw in Paul that said maybe what they're saying about him not being a Jew was correct. That Galio was correct. They could see that Paul was a Jew. Everything he said, his knowledge. Now, I realize he interrupted Paul, so you're going to say, wait a minute, he didn't hear him. But I think the things they described about him, we're not told everything that was said, but Galio wasn't interested in whether he was a quote-unquote good Jew or a bad Jew or whatever. But Galio felt like, look, I'm not interested in a quibble over this. And Paul would not have the same lawful protection as Jews, so thus he was contrary to the Roman law if he was teaching a new law. So Galio just rejected this. So what is the goal of the Jews? This is a question, number 3. What is the goal of the Jews attacking Paul in Corinth? What was their goal to attack Paul? Why did they go out? It says that they were united. Why was there such a united attack against Paul in Corinth? Anybody? Joe?
So maybe by that time they had, like you said, they had heard it in Thessalonica,
Mm-hmm,
and all that they finally said, here's our chance, we got to stop this guy.
So yes, that's my first answer. Stop Paul teaching this new faith in Corinth. That is, that Christ is Jesus. You're right. I think they heard that he had done this elsewhere, and he was having success. I mean, look, he's already converted Titius Justus right next door to the synagogue. He had already converted who the other man was. I can't think of who was the other man that he converted that was Crispus, right? So there was evidence of his success. And it said many Christians believed and were baptized. So they wanted to stop his teaching there for sure. But I think also, if I hit this right, that they wanted to punish Paul for breaking what they saw as this Roman law, which says if you can only get protection if you're a Jew and you're worshiping using the ancient rituals. So they saw a chance to punish Paul, not only to stop him from teaching the faith in Corinth, but to punish Paul for breaking that law, if possible. Again, it's the scattershot effect. Let's do what we can. We'll try and stop him. And I think they had a third motive, and that's to stop Paul teaching anywhere else. They were tired of hearing about this. Paul had been in Corinth. How long was he in Corinth altogether? 18 months. So we don't know when the trial occurs. Most people think it was halfway through, maybe a little more than halfway through, 6 months to a year into his stay. There's no way to know for sure. It says he stayed many days after, so we know he didn't leave the next day. So he'd been there approximately a year. He was having success, and they could see it, and they wanted to stop him from going somewhere else and having success. So they took him to the proconsul, and they were trying to stop him from teaching anywhere else. That's in verse 12. Yes, Terry?
Remember that Satan is trying to destroy the church.
Absolutely.
And I think what we're seeing here is a change in Satan's strategy.
Okay.
I think this is the first step Satan is trying to use to get the Roman government involved. Prior to this, Romans have not been interested. And they're still not interested at this point, but we see this now coming to consent of it, the local synagogues, the Jews. Now we're seeing it go to the official government now.
Yes.
Yeah.
To stop him completely.
Yeah.
Seek a higher authority.
Ultimately stop the church.
Yes. So, as you can see, this is the motive, it seems, of those who have attacked Paul. So now we're at the trial, and what happens? Paul stands up on this platform that's about the judgment seat, about 7.5 feet above the crowd, and Paul opens his mouth to begin to speak, and what happens? Yeah, Galio says, wait. He's had enough. Whatever had happened, Galio said, enough. Not interested. Now, I think it was partly because, well, I'll get into that. So Paul was about to open his mouth, and Galio speaks. And in verse 14, Galio says, if there was wrongdoing or if there was vicious crime, I would judge. So he's clear that he has authority to judge in those matters. He's apparently happy to judge in those matters. Then he says in verse 15, since it's a matter of questions about words and names and your own law, he says, see to it yourself. He says, I refuse to be a judge of this. He doesn't want to be a judge of the Jews and be a part of what's going on. So I think I have another question is here. Yes. The next question, why did Galio interrupt Paul and stop the trial? That's the next question. Why did he do that? Wouldn't it have been served him well to listen to the trial and act like he was very important and he had this authority and the people could speak and he could listen and he'd say, what do you think? And tell me about this and ask questions and act very intellectual. Wouldn't that have served him well with the crowd? So why did Galio interrupt Paul and stop the trial? Yes, David.
Well, regardless of how the charge was presented, whether all Moses or all Roman,
Yes.
he saw through it. He saw that it was
Yes.
a religious debate and charges regarding the law of Moses, and it wasn't worth his time.
It was. Amen. Yeah. So my first answer, I agree with you, it was one of them, was that I think Galio was a raving anti-Semitic, and he didn't want to help the Jews at all. And if it looked like he was going to help the Jews, he didn't want any part of it. Because what happens if he judges in favor of the Jews? What's that going to do? Huh? Help them, but what's going to follow later? There's going to be more of these. The Jews are going to come back to him and say, well, listen, this guy's not doing right. You need to censor him. You need to arrest him or punish him or stop him or expel him or whatever. So secondly, he was only in Corinth a short time. He didn't need Jewish conflict. And I think he saw this as a Jewish conflict. And by, as Dave said, by listening to it and by participating, it was just going to encourage more of it. And he didn't want to be involved in this Jewish conflict. He didn't want it. The Romans hated the Jewish conflicts that went on. They did everything to stop it. And I think that was part of it as well, in addition to being an anti-Semite. And finally, this is what Dave said, he just didn't care. It wasn't important to him. He didn't care what the Jews thought and what they thought of Paul and what Paul thought of them. He wasn't interested. He's a friend to the emperor, this guy. He was put there by the emperor. So he's there serving his time, only a short time. He doesn't want this. This is not important to him. So he interrupts the trial, and he wants to move on to other things. He doesn't want to spend time talking about Jewish law and about what they were trying to talk about. And then the next thing is this, and I think I do ask this. Who beat Sosthenes and why? And in verse 17 it says they seized Sosthenes, and he was listed as the ruler of the synagogue. And it says, and they beat him. And Galio paid no attention. Did you understand that? He just kind of, I don't see that. See what beating? I don't see it. And then he drove them out. So my question is who beat Sosthenes and why? Who was it? It said they all, I think is the term. Isn't that right? That they all? So who is they all? And what was their motive? Any ideas? Yes, Jack. Sorry, let's hear.
The Jews beat him because they didn't get their way.
Okay. But why Sosthenes? I understand.
He was the head of the synagogue.
Okay. I'm really close to that. He was the head of the synagogue, and so they beat him because he was the head of the synagogue. Okay, Joe, and then maybe Joe.
It was supposed that maybe Sosthenes would be the prosecutor, and he did not do a very good job.
Right.
And so when Galio said, "Get out of here," they said, "You're the one that messed up, so
Yeah.
we're going to take it out on you."
Good motivation. Maybe Jack, maybe that's what you were saying as well.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that, did you have your hand up, Dave? I didn't want to. Okay. So that was one of my answers. The first one I had is that it could have been the Greeks. The Greeks had a reason. They were anti-Semites as well, and they were angry at the Jews, and they were tired of the Jews and all their, their religious goings on and so on, and their what they may have considered their piety and so on. And it looks like Galio kind of agreed if it was the Greeks. He didn't really care if the Greeks did that. It could have been the Jews. As you all said, the Sosthenes failed the trial and at the trial, and they were embarrassed, and the Jews were embarrassed and shamed, and they were angry that they looked so bad and that there was such a bad loss. He didn't even hear Paul. So here he is about to speak, and Galio says, "I don't even want to listen to this." And then finally, it could have just been literally what it said, everybody, thinking that Sosthenes, this was an interesting one, was a Christian sympathizer. Because where do we see the name Sosthenes later in the New Testament? 1 Corinthians 1:1, Joe's done his studying. We don't know for sure it's the same Sosthenes, so I'm clear about that. But it would be really odd if it was a different, Brian and I talked about this, so I got to give him credit, but it would be really odd if there was another person named Sosthenes who became a member of the church and was helping and connected to Corinth. So it looks like that there might have been some truth to that they might have known about those. Maybe he wasn't emotionally involved in the trial. Maybe he was forced to do it, but he didn't really want to. And who really knows? But I think everybody had a reason to beat Sosthenes, and I think that he was unfortunately the victim of that. So the lesson today is Acts 18:21. Paul goes to Ephesus, and before we can get to Ephesus, we have some other things to talk about. It says that Paul remains in Corinth many days in verse 18, and this is my feeling, conclusion from the verse. Paul's been vindicated. He has gone and stood before a Roman proconsul with apparently a mob after what they did to Sosthenes. So these were people who were angry at the Jews. Certainly they were angry at Sosthenes, the Jews were at one point. So I think Paul felt vindicated. I think he felt like, I can stay here now. I have an establishment with a business with Priscilla and Aquila, and he's successfully prosecuting's not the right word, successfully pursuing, sharing the word of the Lord, teaching that Christ is Jesus. So I think he felt that way. He can teach and preach all he wants now because they're not going to do this again. Are you kidding? They're not going to drag him in front of Galio again. Maybe another Roman proconsul, but not Galio. And then the Lord had promised protection, and the Lord delivered. I think that was a huge moment for Paul. When the Lord came to Paul in a vision and said, don't be afraid, don't stop teaching, I'm with you, I'll take care of you. I think that was really important. And I just want to be clear that he wasn't vindicated. It wasn't because Galio was such a model of justice and fairness. I don't want you to get that impression. Galio was a character. It wasn't that he saw in Paul some good virtues, and Galio just didn't want to be involved. That was my taking. He was known as an anti-Semite. And if Paul was a Jew, then he would have never had any sympathy for Paul. He just didn't want to spend time on it, and he didn't want to do it again. So I think he saw this as a way to stop it. Don't come to me again. Yes?
What's the anti-Semite?
Anti-Semite, Jewish, anti-Jewish. It's the term we use today I don't think it was in use probably in the New Testament, but it's a term today. Semites were Jews, and so it's a term we use today for people who just think the Jews are, what do they call them? Well, I don't want to pick on the people from the Middle East, but they call them dogs, and And so anybody who has a prejudice against the Jews because they're Jews, not because they disagree with their religion, but because they think that they're dogs, they're lower than humans. And so that's somebody who's prejudiced against the Jews, who just doesn't like them, hates them, and would like to be mean to them, would like to get rid of them. So does that help? Is that okay? Yes, Brian.
It helps me to remember, like, they come from the line of Shem. So you have Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
I was praying some.
So the Shemites are, that's where the Jews come from.
And so it's a version of Shem.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you. I thought that's what it was, but I wasn't as confident. So thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Good question. Thank you. Good question. Appreciate that. So let's move on then. Now Paul's going to depart Corinth, and he says he wants to go to Jerusalem. So he's been there a year and a half, 18 months, and he's had some successes and, some troubles. But he bids farewell to the brothers and the sisters, which I think indicates that they're close. He uses that term, the brothers, and some versions have and sisters. So he bids farewell to the church. They've spent some time together. Now, you all can correct me if I'm wrong, especially Brian, but I think this is the longest he's spent in a church once he started his missionary travels. Is that a fair statement so far? Up to this point, yes. Not the longest in a place. Ephesus, he was 3 years. But to this point, this is the longest he spent in a city. So he has probably gotten attached. He can probably also see the need that they have for him there, with Corinth being, what it is. We'll talk about that in a bit. He sails. He's going to sail from the port of Cenchrea, and he's going to go to Ephesus, and he's going to take Priscilla and Aquila with him. And then we have the vow. So my next question is number 6, is what vow is this? What vow is this? So I've got my answers up there, but you can give your own if you disagree. Yes, Jack?
It's pretty well accepted that it was a Nazarite vow.
Okay. Not necessarily well accepted. Waldron doesn't accept it, which is okay. He's not the authority. The Bible's the authority. But some of the ones I was studying, Jack, think it was either a Nazarite vow or something like a Nazarite vow. Waldron takes this odd position that he's shaving his head at the beginning of the vow, and there wasn't anybody that I read that felt like that was the case. Several of them that I read said clearly this was the end of the vow, which was typical for a Nazarite vow. You keep the vow, you make a vow, and you keep it, you don't shave your head, and then at some point, 30 days or some point in time, does anybody know any more than that, you shave your head. So it could have been a Nazarite vow. It doesn't seem to me to be likely, but it could have been. If it was, sorry, I'm getting carried away here. If it was, we're not told that it was. So was it the beginning of the vow or the end of the vow? It looks like it was the end. We're just not given much information about the vow. Some thoughts are, what does this show? This shows this keeping of the vow. It shows that Paul never stopped being a Jew. And I think I forget that sometimes. Paul never stopped being a Jew. He was a Christian, but his culture was Jewish. He grew up Jewish. He was a persecutor of the Christians. So it shows he was very much into the Jewish traditions. And he clearly observed the Jewish customs and the laws, including circumcision. We know about that with Timothy and others. So he never stopped being a Jew. So this participating in this vow was only extension of Paul's continuing to keep the Jewish tradition. A probable explanation is that a vow Paul made at the vision of the Lord in verses 9 and 10. That's one conclusion one can draw. We don't have to know this exactly. So he was so thankful for the Lord coming into his life in a direct way and speaking to him and saying, don't be afraid, don't stop speaking, I'm with you, that he was thankful for that. And he knew he was going to have serious persecution, and he did with that trial and the things around it. So he was thankful for his safety. And one thinking is that after he completed that vow, it was time to shave his head. So you could draw that conclusion that Paul was most grateful for the Lord's protection, and it shows how serious the persecution of the church was in Corinth, and it doesn't let up. And some believed and some persecuted Paul. Natural reactions. Some believe, some don't care, and some get angry. And I think that was part of the vow that Paul was making. We don't know a lot about it, so I don't want to get too hung up on it. But I think it just shows that Paul was serious in his faith and his Jewishness, as well as being a faithful Christian. And the Nazirite vow, the reason, Jack, some people argue against that is that you have to complete the vow in Jerusalem, in the temple, and you shave your head and then you offer the hair as a sacrifice. And that was what I understand is the right way. Then others have argued that it still could be, you could shave your hair anywhere you wanted, but you had to take it to the temple and offer it. And that could be why he was anxious to get to Jerusalem, if it was a Nazirite vow, to properly observe that he was taking the shaved hair to Jerusalem, offering it as a sacrifice and so on. So it's hard to know. I'm just saying that there are some things that kind of give credence to the fact that that might have been what was going on. So any questions on the vows, any thought? Didn't you need to get too hung up on that? Okay. So we're going to look at Paul in Ephesus. We're going to verse 19 now. And it says that Paul went directly to the synagogue and reasoned with the Jews. As Joe said Wednesday night, that sounds familiar, right? He always goes to the synagogue. Very familiar. He did it everywhere, just about everywhere he went. So my question for you is, to me, it's significant that Paul went directly to the synagogue. Why is that significant? Now, I'm talking about in Ephesus now, specifically in Ephesus. That is one of your questions, question 7. Why is it so significant that Paul went directly to the synagogue in Ephesus? Any ideas? Again, this is my thoughts, so you might not have any idea of what I'm thinking. So I think it's important that he went to the synagogue because I think in Corinth, since in Corinth, Paul was charged at the tribunal for teaching Jesus, he felt like he was now exonerated, and normally wouldn't that strike fear of a repeat problem, but not with Paul. He's courageous and bold. So it's a double-edged sword. He was teaching in Corinth. He was charged, but he was exonerated. So it depends on the person, naturally, how we're all going to respond to a charge like that in a scary time. But Paul responds by going to the synagogue and says, I was exonerated. The Lord said he's going to be with me. So he wasn't afraid at this point. Some time had passed, a little time had passed since the trial. So I think that he began to feel like, look, the Lord wants me to do this. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to go to the synagogue. Then I have another answer. Paul never intended to stay long. It was just going to be a stop on the journey to Jerusalem. He crossed that, whatever that is, that sea or that area. And then he was leaving from Ephesus, and he was traveling down to Caesarea so he could get to Jerusalem. And yet he was asked to stay longer, and he declined. He said, I will return if God wills. So my next question is, why couldn't Paul remain longer in Ephesus? That's the number 8 on your question sheet. Why couldn't Paul remain longer? Why did he choose to stay a year and a half in Corinth and only stay literally a few days or something, a week, I don't know, some short time in Ephesus? Any ideas? Why couldn't Paul stay longer in Ephesus? Well, I can help you. I happen to have an answer. I think Paul needed and wanted to report to the church in Jerusalem and Antioch. I think so much had happened on his travels, especially in Corinth, but in the other cities as well, that he had both successes and trials, and he was accountable to other Christians. This was not going to be the church of Paul. This was the church of Christ, or the church belonging to Christ, and he was going to report because he felt accountable to them. Paul always felt accountable, that he had to share things with people and tell them what was going on. Again, the successes and failures. So I think going to Jerusalem was part of that. And rather than getting waylaid in Ephesus, he felt like he had been gone, I don't know, I think we estimated on this journey, what did we talk about, Brian? 2 years or 3 years total on this journey, give or take, hard to know. So he'd been gone a while. So I think he felt like, it's been a really long time. I need to report to the church in Jerusalem and tell them about what I've done and the successes and failures so that they know he's still with them. They're the same group, the same family, they're brothers and sisters, and they're fighting the same cause. Secondly, it was probably to attend, I didn't get my spacing right, but probably to attend a Jewish festival, possibly the Passover in Jerusalem. So that's an option as well. He had missed the Jewish festivals and he wanted to go and participate in the Passover again. And then he returns to Ephesus. So he wanted to do that. And then some think it was to complete the vow by offering as a sacrifice at the altar of the hair. So it would take care of three things: his accountability to the church in Jerusalem and his desire to participate in a Jewish festival, probably Passover, and then to complete the vow. So Paul has very, I think, specific reasons to move on to Jerusalem and not get waylaid or delayed in Ephesus. Any questions on that? Or I do have just a little more. So, okay, well, so any questions on why Paul couldn't remain longer in Ephesus? Any thoughts? Yes, Scott.
I was thinking in terms of him going in Ephesus there directly to the synagogue. His reputation had to have followed him. There must have been some thought on who this man was. He would have put everything he could, to bed. This is who I am. This is what I'm preaching.
Oh, in Jerusalem.
Well, when he went to Ephesus, he went directly to the synagogue.
Okay.
Trying to just, lay out
To the Christians
people to know who he was.
in Ephesus, is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. To clear the air, so to speak.
Clear the air.
Okay. They could have heard of his charge, and maybe they didn't get all the truth. Good point. Never thought of that. That's a good, very good point. Very good point. Okay. Yes, Brian.
Yeah, I'm just amazed at how much Paul loves his Jewish brethren.
Oh, yes.
Because it has been a pattern from the start to go to the synagogue,
Yes.
but it's also been a pattern of getting rejected by the Jews in the synagogue and then chased around by the Jews in the
Yes.
synagogue and try to get murdered by the Jews in the synagogue. And yet now he still goes to the Jews in the synagogue. So I'm just amazed by that he loves them. He knows that the promises belong to them first, and then the Greeks.
Absolutely.
He still goes there.
And he watched the beating of Sosthenes by probably Jews. Yet, you're right, he still cares about them. Absolutely, good point. Any other points? Okay, so in verse 22 it says, Paul went up and greeted the church. Now, what I want to be clear about is it doesn't tell us what city he went up to, and it doesn't tell us what church he went to. So my question might be, up to the church, what church? Well, I go ahead and answer it. Yeah, that's not on here. He was going up from the port to Jerusalem. You would never go down from a port city to an inland. Can you imagine? I mean, maybe in the Netherlands or in Italy. What's that city on the island? What is it? Venice. Yeah, you might do that there, but typically you don't go down from a port city and up to the port. So he's going from the port at Caesarea up to Jerusalem. Jerusalem was in a hilly area. We've talked about this before, how that you always went up to Jerusalem and then down to other places. And the only church that would qualify for the church would be the church in Jerusalem. They would never say the church and mean any other church. The church in Antioch, the church in Ephesus, whatever. They would never say it. It would always be the church in Jerusalem. So he's going to go up to the church in Jerusalem. We told why: to report, to participate in the Passover, to complete the vow. So he goes up to the church and he greeted the church. We're not told what happens there. Luke does not tell us. Wouldn't you like to know what happens in Jerusalem? I'd love to know. We don't know why Luke doesn't tell us, but he covers a lot of ground between Ephesus and Jerusalem and Antioch in just a very few verses. First Bill, I know it. So Ephesus, from Ephesus to Caesarea to Antioch to Ephesus. So it's just a few verses, but it's many miles and more time. So from Ephesus to Caesarea, the voyage was at least 600 miles. I know you typically do nautical miles. I couldn't find nautical miles, but it's 600 miles, and that's basically air miles. So, a ship is not going to do an air mile. The ship's going to go like this. So it's estimated that it would take at least a week to sail from Ephesus to Caesarea. That's why Paul wanted to. And the sailing season, I think, Joe, you might have talked about that, but there's a sailing season when you leave Ephesus. You can't leave in the winter. You have to leave by, October or whatever. And the season doesn't open until March. So that could have been really close. Passover was in April that year. So he had to leave early to get out there so he could be in time for the Passover. So, and then from Caesarea to Jerusalem is 70 miles. That's 24 hours to walk. Most likely Paul was walking. I don't know that Paul, there were no buses. They didn't have any, Uber. So I don't know that they had, where you can hire a horse or whatever, a thing. So he had to walk. He had to walk. It was 24 hours. I don't think he walked 24 hours steady. I don't know what he did. We're not told. But it was a long walk just to go up to Jerusalem. And then from Jerusalem to Antioch is another 500 miles and 143 hours to walk. So, you figure it out. I don't know how, he's doing a lot of walking, again, in a very short time. We're not told what's going on. And then from Antioch to Ephesus, where he's going back to, is another 700 miles in a very mountainous area. And that was estimated to be 214 hours to walk. And I think that's probably today's time, and probably a lot more in those times. So you can just see that this is he's covering a lot of journey. That's my point in just a few verses. So on Wednesday, you're going to talk about Ephesus. I think Tim is going to do that. I don't see Tim in here right this minute. But Tim's going to be working on that. So why is Paul attracted to Ephesus, and what do we want to know about Ephesus? So here are some things I came up with. Ephesus is the greatest commercial city in Asia Minor at the time. So when we talk about the greatest commercial city in the U.S., who do you all think of? New York. Yeah, I can't imagine somebody saying different than New York. I know Atlanta's very involved in the commercial scene. Chicago is. So is L.A., but I don't think anybody would hesitate to say that New York is the... So in that sense, I'm not saying it's a New York. I'm just saying in that sense, it's like that. It's the main connection point from Rome to the east. So if you're traveling from Rome, which is the seat of power at this time, and you're going east, you're probably going to go through Ephesus. You're probably going to go through Corinth as well. I think that's why he picked Corinth, because of that isthmus and that port. You can take a ship to the first port, get off and walk across, and take a ship to the next port. You can refresh and get some food and so on. So Ephesus is a gateway city in that respect. It's the seat of administration for the Roman government in that area. There you go again. Here we're back to the Roman proconsul and the Roman authorities. It's a free Greek city. A free Greek city means it has its own senate and its civic assembly. So in that sense, it's an independent city, and it's not quite so tied as other cities are dependent on Rome. I think what Tim is going to talk about is the Temple of Artemis, or what we call Diana. I didn't spell that right. It's Diana. I didn't get that right, sorry. What do we know about the Temple of Diana, or Temple of Artemis?
One of the 7 wonders.
Yeah, one of the 7 wonders of the world. I mean, there's some history to it. It was constructed, and then there was, at 350 BC, there was some sort of a problem, and then in 6 BC, and then the Romans built it back, and there was a lot going on, but it was considered an important place of architecture there and worship as well. There's a large settlement of Jews in Ephesus, and those Jews were granted privileges by Julius Caesar and Augustus. Now, it wasn't technically by Julius Caesar, it was by Dora somebody, but he was an associate. It was because of Julius Caesar's authority, and Augustus confirmed it many years later. So they've got privileges there in Ephesus. And I think Paul sees this good place. If you're going to convert somebody and they're moving on to somewhere else, isn't that a perfect place to convert them, to teach them? So that's just my thoughts. Wednesday night, please read pages 121b to 125a, and that you'll find that in Acts 18, verses 24 to 28. Any comments before the bell rings that I overlooked? Thank you for your time and your attention and participation. It's been a while since I've taught a class, and I appreciate the opportunity to stand before you, and I hope that your faith was encouraged as we watched Paul and Priscilla and Aquila do things that were mighty and wonderful. Thank you.